Thank you for joining the Anika Apple Podcast. You know, this podcast is one that it's dedicated to our journey to heal. And we talk about healing from the perspective of who we are as leaders, who we are in community with one another, what the things are that we have as accountability to ourselves. And of course, we round out every month with our divine guidance. What is God speaking through me, so that we have an understanding of how to prepare, how to make sense of what is happening in the world, and how to navigate in our own relationship and gifting that God has given us. On this week's episode, we're going to be talking about the relationship that we have to love. We're really focusing in on the most important love relationship in your life, and it might be a little bit different than what you think. So I'm so glad you could join me for the episode today. I had the opportunity last week to share an event called Your Heart is Calling. And in the event, I had the opportunity to share some of the divine insight that God has given me about love. In particular, God spoke to me about the most important love relationship that we have in our lives. And a lot of times we think about that love relationship and make the assumption that it's us with another person, with our partner, or perhaps, if you're a parent, it's with your children, or maybe it is you as the child and you're thinking about the relationships that you have with your parents. But that's not it. Sometimes we think about the relationship that we have with God as being the most important relationship in our lives. And technically, absolutely, yes. But that really isn't the relationship that God was focusing on. You see, the relationship that you have with yourself is the most important love relationship in your life. And the reason that it is the most important relationship in your life is, first of all, it's an extension of the love relationship that you have between you and God, between you and the divine. But it also is a manifestation of the relationship that you have with God. It is a relationship that you nurture in a way that is very different than the experience that you have in the relationship with God. What do I mean by that? You still have your portion of what you are constantly giving to God. However, the unconditional nature of the relationship, what flows from God to you, is ever flowing regardless of anything else that is going on in your life, which is different than cultivating a relationship where there might be starts and stops, where there might be ebb and flow. That's what we find in our relationship that we have to ourselves, and that's what we have in our relationships that we have with other people in our lives. So what's really important is that we think of the relationship that we have to ourselves as being the most important love relationship, because it sets the tone for everything else. Now, let me back up a couple of steps and say the love that we experience from God is the center of life. It is everything. When you have this flow, this relationship between you and God going well, when it is moving undisturbed, when you are positioning yourself with the ability to receive and pour love back into God in the way that you glorify God, in the way that you have relationship with God, in the way that you sit with God, that you seek with God, when you are reciprocating your part of the relationship, God is always flowing into you. You are really in a place where you find wholeness. Now, what disturbs that relationship is the way that we engage with ourselves. And so a lot of times we will find ourselves in a place where we are not open to receive. We may find ourselves in places where we're holding on to unforgiveness for things that we have done, for choices or decisions that we've made across our lives. And what we may not realize is, even though we still have that flow coming to us from God, our relationship with ourselves can stand in the way of our ability to receive it. If you've ever had a moment where you have asked God for forgiveness for a choice or decision that you've made, you've sat with God. God has granted that forgiveness to you. We know that this happens right through the life of Jesus Christ, for those of you that believe in Jesus. And you're like, okay, so now, things are better. We've reconciled this, right? I've repented and I'm in a good place now. But then a couple of days later, you can't get your mind off that thing. And months later, and then something else happens, and years later, you're still thinking about the same thing that God has already forgiven you from. We put ourselves in these predicaments where we cannot let go of the past because we have not forgiven ourselves. And when we do that, we put ourselves in a position of cutting off the consistent flow that love that God wants to pour into us, the consistent flow of love that God wants to pour into us. We block it because we're unable to receive, because we now don't feel that we are worthy, because we cannot let go of something that happened in the past. A lot of our relationship that we have with ourselves comes from moments where we feel that we are unworthy of love. What's really interesting about this is that in order for you to understand where those places are in your life, you've got to do some introspective work. That looks like you sitting with yourself to say, what are the times when I feel like I'm not worthy of love? What comes up for me? What are some of the experiences? Can I get to some of the root causes of where this came from? You would be surprised to see that many of the experiences are not just formed in childhood, but sometimes they're connected to things that we never actually experienced in this lifetime. They may be what I call soul imprints, right? Something that you carry with you from another life. It may be something that you have that is sitting on the inside of you that is a part of your lineage, the generational patterns that you experience. And so we can have a mixture of things that tell us that we are not as worthy of love as what we actually are. And worthiness is just a part, but it tends to be something that in our humanness we struggle with. And so it's always a great place to start your exploration when you're trying to figure out how to better love yourself, is to look at your relationship to your worthiness. There are some things that we are taught too. We're often taught that in order to not be selfish, we have to first pour out to other people, and that we must pour out in such significant measure that they have everything they need, even if it costs us pouring everything that is within us. And so when we have a repetitive pattern of pouring out to others in such massive quantities that we don't have as much, to pour into ourselves, or we're not filling up our own bucket, we find ourselves in situations where we are in lack while we have given so much of ourselves to others. And as you probably imagine, the resulting impact is resentment. And we never want to be in a place where we are experiencing resentment like that, because love is supposed to flow in a way that is unconditional. And so a lot of times we've been taught to pour out, and so that is what we do. And then we have an expectation, well, if I've given you all of this, wouldn't you be giving it back to me? And when that's not reciprocated, oftentimes because you're giving from a place of something that someone didn't ask for, or you may be giving to someone that doesn't have the capacity to pour back into you, we walk away feeling broke down, busted, disgusted, frustrated that we are not receiving what it is that we think we should be. And again, we're taught to look for that love to come from places other than ourselves. So rather than regenerating more love within ourselves, opening ourselves up to receive more love, what can happen is that we can begin to accept a narrative that says, well, since you're not pouring back into me, I must not be worthy of love. And then at that point, we think we should be in scarcity when it comes to love. So we may not be actively looking at how can I pour more love into myself, going back to God and allowing that free flow of love to come from God to us, and we're not receiving it outwardly. And so now we are in a deficit. And what happens when we are in a deficit is that we meet new people and we build new relationships. And in those new relationships, we come in wanting, expecting someone else to give to us because we feel empty, because we don't have enough. If you've ever gone into an environment where people were really looking to connect with one another because they were coming from a place of feeling empty, you might have felt the energy that you walked in with. Maybe you had a lightness and, a lot of excitement about going into this space, and you might begin to feel like almost as if there's a weight, a heaviness. We just think about the moment that, describe the parable, the woman with issues of the blood, and how, she makes her way through the crowd, right, and touches the hem of Jesus's garment. And Jesus says that the power went out from him. And I think about that very much like in these situations where you might walk into where people are just really looking to have their cup filled because they feel so empty, because they've been pouring out to people in such a way that they believed it was the right thing to do, that they believed that there would be some reciprocation, and perhaps had an expectation of that does not get fulfilled. And so now we're walking around looking to see where it can be filled from, right? And so I imagine that in the same way that when you walk into those spaces and you are able to pour into others, you can walk away feeling your energy being actually physically depleted because you have held space for other people, because you were able to pour into them. And in some cases, there's a whole nother podcast episode we could have, right, about energy vampires, people who are pulling energy away from others. But this is not about them. Today's conversation is about you. And the question I would pose to you is, how do you nurture yourself so that you are not in a place of deficit? So that you're not one of the people walking into the spaces who's looking for, that energy to be poured into them all the time. And I want to say all the time because I want you to understand that there are going to be moments in life where we might find ourselves like, oh, I haven't had time to pour back into myself, or something happened and I've needed so deeply to support other people that I didn't realize I was at this deficit. So sometimes we might find ourselves in a place where we need a pour. There's nothing wrong with that. But I want you to become more cognizant of whether or not you're going looking for that from other people, or you recognize that you have the ability to create it for yourself, because you do. One of the most important steps that I would recommend to you is that when you are in a place where you know that you are feeling depleted, where you're not feeling like you have enough love for yourself, that you do not pour out in excess to anyone else until you pause and take some time to nurture yourself. There's a couple things that happen when we do that. So this is where you use this really difficult word maybe for some of you, which is no. It works like this. No. And the reason I can tell you how it sounds is because I had to learn that on my journey too, how to say no in a world where I was like, but I'm supposed to pour out into everyone. It feels good to pour out into everyone until I'm depleted, right? And so learning how to say, no, I can't do that right now because I need to take care of myself over here, is one of the most important ways that you can begin to pour love into yourself. That is to protect yourself and say, I will be the best version of myself for you and anyone else after I've taken a moment to make sure I have what I need. And sometimes that looks like rest. Sometimes that looks like play. Sometimes that looks like journaling. Sometimes it looks like prayer. Whatever those things are that you need to do to pour back into yourself, you should know these are the ways that I can refill myself. So ask yourself that in this moment. What are some of the things that you do when you're done with it, you feel refilled? You feel the love that you poured into yourself. For me, allowing myself to take some time away, shut my door, take a nap, be still, meditate, it is a perfect way for me to tell myself this is how I love me. Because I respond by having such appreciation that I had the moment to myself. And some of you might find yourself to be more extroverted than you are introverted, right? I think that we think that because people tend to be more introverted, that they're the only ones who really need that downtime. That simply is not true. We all are on a spectrum, right, of introversion and extroversion, right? But the reality is that extroverts also need to refill themselves too. We can find ourselves depleted when we're constantly going and we haven't thought about the ways in which we nurture ourselves, and certainly haven't taken time out to plan for that. And so that it's important for you to think of the ways that you nurture yourself. The other side of it is to look at what your relationship looks like with God, with the divine. How do you allow that flow of energy, of love, to flow from the divine? For me, the experience of having God pour love back into me looks like my sitting in prayer. It looks like me being in worship. I can go and sit in my prayer room, pick a favorite worship song, and begin singing to God. And I feel like every time I'm singing worship songs, I feel like God is receiving it in such a way that the pureness of how deeply I love God is being felt. And what I'm receiving at the same moment is the recollection of God's promises, of God's words that I'm repeating in the songs. It's this beautiful back and forth, this melody of love that is flowing between God and I. You'll have whatever versions of that it looks like and works for you in your life. But worship is a great way to come right into that love relationship with God. Another thing might be sitting with God and asking God, what are some of the ways that I'm blocking myself from receiving what you are sending to me? That's a big question, and I just want you to be aware that when you ask the question, God will show you. And sometimes you might not want to see the answers. In some moments, I'm like, I was really blocking that, and I didn't intend to. I didn't recognize that I was blocking that flow of love coming from you, but I can see now how I might have done that. And that awareness then creates the opportunity for you to say, so how can I shift myself in this moment to receive that love? What can I do to remind myself that I am worthy of this love that you have poured into me, this connection that you have created for me? God often reminds me, I hear from God, and so I will hear God tell me it's time to rest. Sometimes when I'm pushing myself to create something new, or I go to God looking for answers, God will tell me to rest first. What God has said to me in the past is rest, and then I will give you the rest. Like, you must take care of yourself first in order to then have whatever else it is. And there's so many other things that you might find that resonate with you about the ways in which you can open yourself up to experience the love of God. I will tell you that the other thing that I think is so important for us to recognize is that we are actually to pour into ourselves first. Now, I know that's probably contrary from what you have learned. You might be like me, and I've shared this in other podcasts. Part of how I grew up was this thing that, you love thy neighbor as thyself, meaning take care of others in such a way that they have everything that they need. You help them fulfill all of their needs and all their desires, and then you'll be in good shape. Like, you'll be covered. They'll take care of you. You'll take care of you. Somehow, miraculously, you get taken care of. But there is a more excellent way. If we go back and we read this again, it's love thy neighbor as thyself, which if you think about the wording and the way the English language works, it would say that you already love yourself. And here's the kicker. If you pour love into yourself first, you'll have more than enough overflow to pour into other people. So when you develop the love relationship with yourself, when you are great at knowing how to fill yourself up from love, what it is that brings you joy, what it is that matters to you, how to replenish yourself, you will always be able to ensure that you are full. You love others at the capacity that you are able to love yourself. If you're in a love relationship with someone right now, a partner relationship, and you're like, why won't they love me the way that I need to be loved? Pause and take a look at how they love themselves. Take a look at it. You can tell a lot by the love relationships that people have with themselves. So if you want some insight, look at the way in which they're able to give love to themselves. What are the patterns that they have of how they pour into themselves? Is it covering for a deficit or a feeling of scarcity or unworthiness? Because a lot of times what you will find is that people are struggling themselves with how to pour that love into themselves. First and foremost, many of us were never taught to think like that. We were taught to look at pouring love into others and then creating an expectation of them to pour into us. Instead of recognizing that when we have a good, healthy love relationship with ourselves and we are able to receive what God is pouring into us, we are full. The best relationships, lasting relationships, are ones where each person is whole unto themselves, where they know that they know that they know that if their partner walked away today, they would still be good. They would be sad. They might miss them. There might be some longing, those things might be present. But the truth is, they know they're good. And imagine the relationship that you have with someone when you are able to pour into them from your overflow, and because you're choosing to pour into them because you want to, where it doesn't feel obligatory, it doesn't feel like it's coming with conditions, where it doesn't feel like you're pouring into a boat with holes in the bottom, where no matter how much you pour in, it will never be enough. Most of us have had experiences in those kinds of relationships. And if you're in a relationship today, it would be a great time for you to start to look not at your partner, but at your relationship with yourself. A long time ago, a good friend of mine said to me, I believe that relationships work best when each person is the partner that they desire to have. And if you think about that, it makes a lot of sense. If I partner for myself, with myself in the way that I would want my partner to be, then I am not starting from a place of deficiency. I know what I like. I know what I need. I know how to give it to myself. I know how to create the space for it. I know that I'm worthy of it. I know what I deserve. And so if you think about having that kind of awareness of who you are and what you need and how to create that for yourself, and then you walk into a relationship with someone else, it's beautiful because they have the opportunity to experience your wholeness. And you get to be really, really clear about what you need and what you desire from them as your partner. And they know exactly what it is that you're looking for. If you've ever been in a situation or scenario, and this could be outside of love relationships, but where someone asked you, well, what is it that you want? And you couldn't answer the question, this is where that comes from. Because there's something in us historically that makes us feel like we're not worthy of having that desire, of knowing what it is that we want, of being able to articulate it to someone else. The reasons for it may vary. But for example, you might feel like, well, if I ask for this, am I asking for too much? When you're clear about what you deserve, it is so much easier to say, I know I deserve X. When you know that you can deliver that for yourself, then it's really easy to state it because you're not putting a pressure on the other person to have it or to give it to you. You're saying, I know that I desire X. And I don't need you to give it to me. I can give it to myself. I can find it for myself. I can create that love relationship inside myself. So I'm not at a deficit. Whatever you give to me will be overflow. Whatever ways in which we build relationship comes at a surplus, as opposed to meeting me at the bottom of the barrel, at the place of emptiness, where the person might feel like, I don't know if I can support you because I just don't have enough to pour into you to fill up what you need. There's a maturity in relationships that happens when we can see ourselves in this way. And what I know God wants us to understand about this is that we will never be in a deficit when we allow God to show us our true intrinsic value. When we go looking to God instead of to the world, instead of comparing ourselves to the standards of people around us, and instead we go to God and say, God, you've maybe created me differently than what I see in other people. And God's like, yes, because that's your secret sauce. It's your superpower. It's what's special about you. I created you in this way so that you can do these things. And that becomes this beautiful part of who you are and what you're able to gift to the world that no one else can. When we can see ourselves like that, then it's easy for us to pour love into ourselves. A lot of times, the reasons we have developed these relationships with unworthiness is because we've been comparing ourselves to other people, thinking that we're supposed to walk a path that looks like theirs. And for those of you who know that you're anointed, that ain't your path. You know you're different. It's intentional that you were set apart because there's something for you to do and you know you're called in this time. And in order for you to be able to do it at the height of what God has created you created in you the ability to deliver. You've got to be in a place where you are loving yourself with reckless abandon. And that looks different than the ways that you have been taught. And it certainly looks different than what the world would tell you. But find a beautiful relationship in your life, one that's working well and has worked well for a long time. And I can pretty much guarantee you that you will find that both people have a pretty good relationship with themselves, that they know their truth. They know how to love themselves. They know how to take care of themselves. Because when you have that, it is so easy for you to be in flow with another person. So I want to close this section with a reminder to those of you who are parents. And what's important that I think you know is that a lot of times there is this relationship that we have where there's an expectation for our children to be able to pour back into us in the way that we pour into them. And I just need you to know that's not the role. It is not their role to pour into and to care for their parents in ways that we don't know how to care for ourselves. I see it all too often where there is this expectancy for the children to give back to the parent in the way that the parent gave to the child. That is very different relationship than it is when you're dealing with a partner relationship or with other adults. Your children are not to be expected to pour back into you in the way that you pour into them. That's your job as a parent. And you are supposed to show them and teach them the healthy way to build relationships. When we look to children to fill the parent back up, you're creating a pattern of codependency that will be ingrained in who they are. And they will come into adulthood and be working through those, through failed relationships with you, with their siblings, and with their partners. So if there are parts of this that you see showing up in your relationships with children, you've got to shift it now. We will have more of a community issue with codependency if we continue to parent children in the way that they're being parented today. There is far too much expectation for them to bridge the gap that has been created by our inability to deeply and truly love ourselves and choosing codependent relationships. And so if those things are present for you and you're a parent, I really want to encourage you, invite you to spend some time doing your own healing work and to encourage your children to do theirs as well. That might look like working through having a therapist, family therapy, individual support, but it's so super important that we correct those patterns early on when they have started to develop. Codependency is a really, really prevalent thing in our society. And it's important that we recognize it and understand that it creates deficiency for us in so many ways that are so much broader than our love relationships. Abundance is connected to everything in your life. And when there is a scarcity of love, when there is a feeling of unworthiness, you are literally blocking the abundance that is designed to flow to you. And so if there are places in your life right now that you're feeling like there's scarcity, then you might look back again at this love relationship that you have to yourself and ask yourself, what could be different? How could I pour more love into myself? When you create that relationship with yourself, you will see your relationship with abundance change. So if you took nothing else away from the episode today, I hope you heard me really clearly that you have the ability to nurture the most important love relationship in your life by yourself. It means getting to know you, understanding yourself, honoring yourself, creating ways to pour love into yourself that might connect to play, that might connect to finding pastimes that are new or different, your quiet time, quality time, nurturing yourself. Sometimes I think we think about self-care as like going for a massage and all these things. Absolutely, all of those things. But it also is about honoring your emotions. It also is about knowing your truth. It also is about saying yes to yourself for the things that are important, particularly when it is time with you by yourself. It's also taking the time to explore what's important for you. What do you really need in a relationship that would be fulfilling? And how can you first give that to yourself? If you can be a great model of what loving you looks like to your partner, you make it very easy for them to show up for you in the ways that you desire. And when you create a relationship with yourself that doesn't pull from another person, guess what? You get a lot more willingness to be present with you. Think about how you feel about that, right? Someone walks into the room and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here. I need you. Is your reaction like, oh, okay, let me give you everything I have? Or is it like, okay, hold on a second. Like, let me first calculate what I can contribute in this moment. We probably have been both across our lifetimes, but you learn when you're that former, like you get depleted. And so a lot of times we are pulling that into our own love relationships, and it's time for us to do it differently. So that's the time that we have for the episode for today. I hope that you have found this really enlightening and that you will take the time to do some introspective work to start to define what you can do to pour more love into yourself. And remember, the impetus of all of the love relationships that we have in our life is the relationship that we have from God, right? So it's understanding what it really feels like to experience and be the recipient of unconditional love. The beautiful thing about it is as you grow in your relationship to that unconditional love, you will want to give more and more of that unconditional love to other people in your life. And it becomes so beautiful to give without an expectation of receiving. It's freedom for you, and it creates freedom for those around you. There's nothing better than those love relationships where both partners are able to so truly take care of themselves that it's a choice to come into connection with one another. It's a little bit different than the familial relationships that you have, at least when you're talking about the generations younger than you, right? Who might have some level of actual dependency upon you. But we can still nurture good, unconditional relationships with those who need us, because as parents, we are created to help sustain them during this time of their lives. But we can help them have healthy relationships with themselves that will then build into the relationships that they build with others throughout their lifetime. Love is the most important thing that we have in this world. You want to change the world? It starts with your love relationship with yourself. You want to create change in the environments outside of you. You want to bring more love into the way that we treat our neighbors. You want to see shifts happen in the political and social climate of the world. Love is the answer. It will always be the answer. It will always be the answer. Thank you for joining me for the Anika Apple Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. As always, peace and blessings.